Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And that brings us to a title which has been designated by Criterion at SPY number 1180 in a 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 1991. The name of the director is Ridley Scott, and the name of the work is Thelma and Louise. This is the work from the year 1991, and it is from the writer, the screenwriter, Callie Curry, and it is from also the director, Ridley Scott, and director of photography, Adrian Biddle, and among its legendary cast, we have people like Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis and Christopher McDonald and Michael Madsen and Harvey Keitel and Brad Pitt and others. I'm of course speaking of this work, which is Thelma and Louise. And my goodness, Thelma and Louise, this work, Thelma and Louise, arrives into the Criterion Collection physical media catalog this year, courtesy of this really great physical media release, which is what I have here on the table. We'll speak a little bit about some of the details of the physical media release and the presentation a little bit later. But this is a fantastic 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo release from Criterion with, oh my goodness, it's a great release of a great work. And if we were to try to speak a little bit about this work in terms of its plot or story structure, I think we would be drawn immediately to this foundational and important and incredibly resonant relationship between these our two protagonists, our two main characters, each of whom are presented and realized and created with such vivid detail and such a human element, a great touch and grace, with character arc dynamics that are very telling and they're very emotionally moving, and that show a sense of change and also a sense of interaction with the outside world and the people that inhabit it, as well as emotional and psychological and really human characteristics and movements that make the performances by Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon truly iconic. And of course I'm speaking of the characters Thelma and Louise. So Thelma being portrayed by Gina Davis and Louise being portrayed by Susan Sarandon. And these again are in their own ways both individually realized and how they interact with each other. These performances and these characters are truly legendary and iconic. And I use the word legendary and iconic, maybe perhaps even mythical, like a myth. I use those phrases very on purpose, because I think that's one way to look at and to interpret and to absorb and engage with the film and the story Thelma and Louise, because we have at its core maybe a story about these two women who are essentially off on a vacation, on a road trip together. We understand from the outset that they already have a type of friendship and bond, and also we understand that maybe from the outset of the film there are some details about their backgrounds that emerge. Other details perhaps remain hidden to be revealed a little bit later throughout the course of the running time. But for example, we understand that Gina Davis's Thelma is married to a very interesting character named Daryl, and perhaps from Thelma's point of view, the marriage isn't the most emotionally satisfying relationship, to put it mildly. So that's something that emerges somewhat early on in the work. And we also understand, too, that there is this very witty and very funny relationship, or this funny tone that's also very human and very heartwarming at the core, that between Thelma and Louise. And perhaps there's almost, in an interesting way, a type of way in which Thelma, Gina Davis's Thelma, relies on the emotional, say, leadership and guidance that Susan Sarandon's Louise provides. There is almost a sense of stability and also a sense of a confidence that we see almost immediately from the way that Louise carries herself, as well as how she interacts with the people around her, including Thelma. And so there is this type of strong bond that is working on many different dynamics. And we get that immediately as we see the two of them embark on this road trip, or this vacation of sorts, this getaway vacation. There's the two of them. However, as the vacation progresses, almost immediately we see things and events and circumstances turn all of a sudden quite, shall we put it, quite dangerous, and perhaps even almost potentially deadly, and very surprising, and very sudden, and very shocking, and to the point where the plans change and shift quite abruptly. And so the two of them have to handle these new, sudden, abrupt changes in a kind of psychological way, and we see how the pressure is placed upon them, and how they have to try to adapt to this. And through their means and their endeavors to try to adapt and essentially be on the run as fugitives, and as almost as outlaws, in a manner of speaking. Therein lies the way in which this film transforms into many different, say, genres and different categories of, say, a film interpretation, which I think bring to life the many myriad ways that one can watch and absorb and become involved in the world of the film Thelma and Louise, and really have a great time every single time one watches it, because I think it presents many myriad ways of looking at this film. So one way perhaps to look at it is as a type of, as I mentioned, road movie. Because one of the central metaphors and conceits, as well as the visual cues of the work, is the two of them driving this on the road, and in terms of the car and the Thunderbird, with this blue turquoise color to it, which becomes its own iconic image. And we see them driving through various points of the United States and the West, and the landscape that is slowly emerging, and the hotels and the motel stops along the way, and the bars and the restaurants as well, and the diners and the places that they stop and eat and have a meal and have a conversation and have a discussion, sometimes lighthearted, sometimes frolicky, other times very serious and very much fundamentally about their own lives and their own trajectories and their fates, as it were. So all of that is wrapped in this in these points of, say, Americana that are very much keyed into their own, say, physical journey, their own road trip, which is embodied in many ways by the driving scenes, and how the two of them are in this car, the open-top car on the road, with the Thunderbird being this very key symbol of that. So that's one way to look at this as a type of road movie. And In that, we also have, through the quick machinations of the plot, we understand that this is also a crime movie, in a manner of speaking. And they're outlaws, they're fugitives on the run, with the law on their heels, trying to apprehend them. And so it has that outlaw, frenzied, high-paced feel to it. And so there are some scenes too that almost have a sense of like car chases and action scenes as well. So there's this thrill and there's this adrenaline rush that accompanies a lot of the scenes, and suspense as well. Will they or won't they get caught? Will they or won't they get away will they or won't they get away with it, etc. So that type of suspense and that type of adrenaline rush is also part of the package here of the film Thelma and Louise, and it's really exciting, and it's really very moving as well, because throughout these scenes of action, there's always the characters and the human beings that we have come to know and love and become associated with as we as viewers watch the film. We are really into their stories, and we are really rooting for the characters, hoping in their own ways that they will make it, because they are so likable. And I should point out too that here in this aspect of quote unquote likability, the way in which the other characters are represented and presented here, there's a sense of a multi-dimensionality to the performances that makes characters, I think, very accessible, and their stories, I think, very much alive. And there is the two-dimensionality is broken in favor of this multi-dimensionality aspect of the way that characters are portrayed. So we don't look at them necessarily as cardboard cutouts or a type of flat presentation. On the contrary, everything is very robust and very fully brought out. So I'm speaking of the performances by, for example, Christopher McDonald as Daryl, which is really one of the highlight performances, as well as the other highlight, including Michael Madsen's performance, or Brad Pitt's performance, or Harvey Keitel. So many surprises and so many ways in which their performances really provide delights and surprises, as well as twists and turns in the story, that add to this idea of what I mentioned before about the suspense and the chases and the sort of the deceits and deceptions, as well as the way in which characters are connecting with each other in this road trip movie that's also a chase movie, that's also a film about outlaws and fugitives. It's also a film that could be said in that way to be almost like a western. There is a way in which this film acts as a type of modern day western, against the backdrop of the 90s landscape, or the early 90s landscape of America. With the great backdrop shots of the West, and the idea of fugitives from the law, and the idea of going from place to place in a type of mini adventure setting situation. I'm speaking of Thelma and Louise here. So it almost acts as a type of modern day Western, which adds to, I think, the way in which the film can then leap into and transform into and jump into the world of myth and legend. And I'm speaking here too of the great myth and legend characters that are Thelma and Louise. And that too brings me to another way to look at this, is when we think about the characters Thelma and Louise, and we think about the way in which their dynamics shift and change and adapt and grow and evolve and develop, it's truly a sight to behold. I mean, we think about where the characters are at the start of the film, and as things happen and their dynamics are and they're trying to adapt, sometimes we see the dynamics shift. Sometimes we see one character who seems to be maybe the stable, quote unquote, the stable anchor in the relationship. Maybe that stability is shifted to the other side, and so then the other character becomes, quote unquote, the guiding force, etc. And then that shifts back, and that type of evolution, or that type of changing dynamic, happens when certain plot beats occur. and when certain, say, tragedies or certain setbacks befall our characters in their own ways. And I'm speaking of how Thelma's story evolves and how Louise's story evolves, and how those evolutions complement each other in this really beautiful and refined and graceful way that makes their stories so much come to life, and how their stories and how the interaction of the stories really makes their bond, Thelma and Louise's bond, all the more real and all the more potent. And that type of resonance is truly outstanding indeed. And yet another way that we can view this film, Thelma and Louise, is as a great say, example of storytelling to emphasize, or from the perspective of feminist storytelling. And this is a point that's acknowledged in a lot of the discussions that can be found in the supplements. For example, a lot of the comments, great comments provided by the fantastic and brilliant screenwriter Callie Curry, as well as some of the essay material writings that are found in the great booklet, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, where many commentators and many academics and many critics who have watched this film so many times and who know this film through and through, they can also view this film through this viewpoint and interpretation of feminist storytelling, and that is because we have at the core of this film, as I mentioned before, the foundational and key relationship between Thelma and Louise, their own journeys, Thelma's journey and Louise's journey. And I mentioned earlier that they sometimes intertwine, but sometimes they clash as well. And so each, in their own ways, is on their own, say, journey of discovery or self-discovery. And we can also identify and recognize then that there are many circumstances that they confront in the film that have a sense of a type of maybe patriarchy, a type of maybe male patriarchy that is imposed, which could be said to be somewhat maybe patronizing to one degree, or perhaps even deadly and quite demoralizing on the one hand. And we see in those ways how Thelma and Louise cope with those situations, how they try to maybe try to handle those situations, and how they even try to maybe recognize and try to find some kind of solution or answer or victory despite or over such situations. And so that type of journey is also part of, say, those situations are part of the journey, or part of the road movie aspect. The road movie on the road, as well as the journey-like aspect of the two characters as they are making these stops of discovery and self-discovery, of maybe handling, dealing, as well as trying to win over and trying to find a sense of liberation or freedom in the face of this type of pressure, patriarchal pressure, that we see evident throughout a lot of the scenarios in the film. And that also has to do with types of attitudes, and attitudes of, say, guilt, or attitudes of type of remorse, or even morality, that themselves could be said to be derived from a type of, say, social mores that could be itself derived from its own sort of patriarchal attitudes themselves. So it comes into question how we essentially view ourselves. Do we view ourselves in the context of these societal expectations, or do we try to break free from those societal expectations and yearn for, or try to find something else and something outside of such expectations? And I think that becomes the crux of the journey of Thelma and Louise, respectively. Again, through the context of this idea of the focus on this work as a feminist film. So, and then that way, the film acts as a type of almost exhilarating and a very fascinating watch indeed, that I think has a lot to say on those fronts, both in terms of the contents of the film as well as the, say, an understanding of how the film met certain, say, critical attention upon its immediate release, which is also spoken about in some of the materials here as well, which also I think is part of that discussion, and very important discussion indeed. So in those and other ways, I think this work, Thelma and Louise, has so much resonance and so much of relevance and so many levels that make for a truly breathtaking and extraordinary film viewing indeed, that I think is so just so timeless. And we're speaking about it, and the film is being spoken about. You know, it's been part of the lexicon of the American modern American cinema since its release, and so legendary stuff, absolute legendary stuff. And just to bring it back home, you know, this is a type of film that has a kind of iconic status, a legendary status. I mean, you have the look and feel of it. It has a feel of the American Western, as I mentioned before. The Americana touches the visual styles. Adrian Biddle's director of photography, the direction by Ridley Scott, and then the great dialogue, Callie Khouri's writing, and the central performances, Susan Sarandon's Louise, Gina Davis's Thelma. These are landmark now, and they are legendary, and they are indeed characters that are part of the legend and myth of modern day American cinema in the form of this truly brilliant work. This is Thelma and Louise. The Criterion Collection has released this work, Thelma and Louise, at spine number 1180 in this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, in this Digipack edition, which means it's got this cardboard casing on the outside, and inside you have this inner compartment, and you open it up, and excuse me here, I forgot to do this. There we go. You open it up, and when you open it up, you can get the booklet right here, and then you can take the booklet out, which is a staple booklet, by the way, which is wonderful. And then on one side, you have the 4K UHD disc, and then on this side, you have the two Blu-rays, one featuring the film itself plus some supplements, and then the other featuring more supplements. So the 4K UHD disc and the two Blu-ray discs. So 3 discs overall. And according to the booklet, which is a great staple booklet, by the way, on page 32, there's a note about the master, and I quote, "Thelma and Louise is presented in its original aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. This new digital transfer was created from the 35mm original camera negative, which was scanned in 4K resolution on a Laser Graphics Director film scanner. The 5.1 surround soundtrack was remastered from the original LCRS magnetic track. On the 4K Ultra HD disc, the feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR high dynamic range. On the Blu-ray, it is presented in high-definition SDR, standard dynamic range. Mastering supervisors Lee Klein, Ridley Scott." So I must say from the outset that I saw this film for the first time in the early 90s, and I saw it on VHS tape. And so I was around 12 or 13 when it was initially released, so I wasn't able to catch it in the theater, unfortunately, but I did watch it on VHS, and it was a huge deal. It was such a huge deal and also at the Academy Awards that year. There was so much attention. It was great, and people were talking about it. And there was a moment when I think Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon were presenting an award, and they were actually talking about the film, and they were talking about the ending, etc. So it was already by then, it was already into the sort of consciousness, in a manner of speaking. So in this atmosphere, I was so curious to watch this film. So watching on VHS, and then just through the years, watching it, and just loving it, even more every time. But I was never able to watch this in the theater, unfortunately. So my frame of reference is, I admit, quite limited when it comes to presentation history and various versions, how this has looked and sounded over the years. So I apologize in advance for my very limited and low quality comments when it comes to the presentation. I can only speak from my own subjective perspective here, but so I can say that I was so taken with this. I thought this looked and sounds great. This Criterion release, this 4K resolution transfer, looks and sounds great. And it's crisp and detailed. I must say too that I love how the richness of the skyline, on the blue and the clouds of the sky, how that contrasts. There seems to be this great vivid contrast with the blueness and the white of the clouds, and the brown earth and the dust of the canyons and the valleys and the roads, as we get further and further into the quote unquote the Americana, the West, as it were, and that those outdoor scenes are really important, and really again, one of the great aspects of this film is how it portrays this idea of the West, the American West, and the myth and the legend and the landscape and the rugged outdoors, and almost the physicality of that, and the dust. And this is so important in terms of a visual motif, as well as the way the color scheme is applied. And so that rich, vivid detail and those contrasts between the sharpness of the blues and the brown earth, the dust in the air is captured, I think, so well. While at the same time, there is a kind of for lack of a better phrase, there's almost a type of filter effect that's, I think, inherent in the great photography of Adrian Biddle. It has that 90s filter effect sheen to it. It's always had that sheen to it, the film Thelma and Louise, but I think that sheen is captured so well as well. There is a way in which that the vividness and the contrasts of the colors, as I mentioned earlier, is so pronounced on the one hand, and at the same time, I feel that the atmosphere of a type of early 90s film is still retained and maintained and preserved. And I think that preservation is also very important too, because it's a film that on the one hand, it's a modern day film, but it's also a film that is also very much about the 90s. And this is remarked upon in a lot of the commentaries and a lot of the comments in the essay, etc. So that feeling of a pronouncement of using technology to make it quote unquote up to date on the one hand, but at the same time still being able to retain this 90s allure and feel to the look and finish. I think that is also very important indeed. So I was very much appreciative of that as well. I love that. It's great. I can say too that there are not many, but there are maybe a couple places where I noticed that there was I mentioned the pronouncement of a type of blue as well, and there's some, not many. There are a couple moments where the blue comes out, I think, very, very richly, and then the way I take that, and the more I think about it, I can see, for example, that there is a lovely way in which the color of the car, the Thunderbird, which is its own character in its own way, is highlighted in a way that I think makes for this type of interesting visual, almost visual dialogue between the pronouncement of the color of the car, how that in a way maybe represents the freedom and adventure of our two protagonists, Thelma and Louise, on the one hand, and how there are elements of the visual dynamic that are either complementing that or perhaps clashing with that in a way that's also mirroring the story of the film, and people trying to understand Thelma and Louise, or trying to get to know Thelma and Louise, or perhaps trying to apprehend and capture and stop Thelma and Louise. So this type of complement and clash is also very evident in an interesting way in how the color palette is working, in taking this this bluish tint of the car as an example. And so I found that pronouncement to be very interesting, interesting indeed. So, and it wasn't at all distracting, because it wasn't like it was overcoming the entire color palette of the screen, but it made those pronouncements, I think, in my mind, in my sort of psychological reaction, as I was engaging with the film, it made me think about those elements all the more, which I'd never thought about before. And again, I'd always seen this in presentations that were very, very serviceable, very high quality, don't get me wrong, but I'd never thought about those interesting, say, visual discussions between color, let's put it that way, that I think so much exist when I watch this film now in 2023, courtesy of the Criterion Collection physical media release. So I was so floored by that, and I thought that was so clever. And I never thought about that aspect of the film before, but it's there. It really is there, and I loved it. And so, so it has that. It has that ability, I think, for a further engagement or rediscovery, in a manner of speaking. And as I say, it's not at all distracting. In fact, it complements the story and the emotional groundwork of the film so well. And then also I mentioned the sharpness of the colors, but there's also the softness of the lighting when you get to some of the nighttime scenes. And there's so many nighttime scenes too. I should have mentioned that as well. The way that either they're driving at night, or the interiors of motel rooms or something at night, or outdoor scenes. There's some key outdoor scenes that take place, really, really key outdoor scenes that have the way in which the light is shining from certain light sources that are visible within the shot on the one hand, and yet there's a type of pronouncement yet shadowed aspect, which I think is balanced so well. And sometimes in past viewings, there would be some things that I'd see in these scenes, but now watching the film, there are some details that appear, like in the car parking lots. There's some details in the background I never quite caught before, and so it's just these further rediscoveries for me, and I think are really wonderful indeed. I should say too that maybe there is this a way in this discussion of presentation and criterion. I know the word teal is oftentimes used in the conversation, and I think that's a very fair conversation to have. Would I use that word in the conversation in terms of my feelings of the presentation with regard to Thelma and Louise? I don't think so, because as I was trying to mention earlier, I think there's a way in which the colors are almost complementing and clashing with each other in a way that I think adds to the overall enhancing effect of watching the film, and it feels so complementary, at least to me anyway, in terms of a psychological effect, as its own visual metaphor for the story and the road trip that is the journeys of Thelma and Louise respectively and together. So that's my, I think, way of saying this is going to be my default, my go-to place whenever I revisit Thelma and Louise. And I should say too that I saw the 4K UHD disc, and I thought it was just great, just eye-popping, fantastic. And then the Blu-ray too, so wonderful. And so I was taken with either presentation. I'm very happy with the Blu-ray, and I'm also very happy with the 4K UHD disc. And so whatever works for you, my dear friends, I think you will enjoy it very much. Now let's continue on with the supplements that can be found as part of this release. And among those supplements, we have 2 commentary tracks, and these are commentary tracks which were from other sources, and so from past years, but we have not 1 but 2 of them. So this is excellent news indeed. So once again, the film can be found on the 4K UHD disc or the first Blu-ray disc, and so when you watch the films, you can watch the films in terms of the commentary track as well as the commentary track options. So as I say, there are 2 commentary track options. The first being a commentary track with Ridley Scott, and this is from 1996. And this is really great. If you haven't heard this commentary track already, oh, that was your opportunity. This is really wonderful because Ridley Scott, he talks about his background and beginnings, his career beginnings in terms of his study at art school and study as a designer, art designer, and then his entry into, say, advertising work, making adverts and advertising BBC work, and then the documentary work, and how that ended up into going into the world of directing, and directing shorts, and then directing feature films, and that led to a very famous work, brilliant work, which is called The Duelists. And then that one thing led to another, in a manner of speaking. So Duelists, Alien, Blade Runner, etc. And that led to the point of the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And then also speaking too about character-driven stories, how this becomes a very important aspect of what he's looking for. And that was one of the many great things that he saw in the story, in the script, by the great Callie Khouri. And I should really, I'd like to point this out too, which is this is one of the great aspects of Ridley Scott's career in his filmography is there are so many ways in which his filmography I think is very famous, and quite rightly so, for the visual strengths of a lot of his films. And I'm speaking of the kind of quote-unquote world-building aspect that he does so well in films like, say, that he's directed, like Gladiator or Alien or Blade Runner, as being some of the great examples here. And so there's a way in which I think his reputation as a visual director, I think, is so very famous, and without question. And here, however, in the conversation, the character-driven aspect and the strength of the characters, I think, is also something that's so important in the Ridley Scott filmography discussion. Because along the way, we always have the way in which the characters are engaging with that visual environment, in a manner of speaking. So we see that in, I think, works like Alien. The character dynamics in Alien, I think, are so well pronounced and top notch. It's brilliant. And Blade Runner too, how the characters are engaging with the world. Thelma and Louise is, I would say, the same thing going on. The visual world building of America in the eyes of Ridley Scott. I mean, this is the world building that's happening. That's, I think, very much going hand in hand with the world building of films like Alien and Blade Runner, for example. The world building in Thelma and Louise is so wonderful. That makes this, I think, such a key component of the Ridley Scott filmography canon. And also the character-driven story. You know, this is a story about Thelma. This is a story about Louise. And so their core relationship is the key of the success or failure of this film. So that, I think, makes Thelma and Louise, in many ways, the key ideal and fundamentally important work in the Ridley Scott canon. And I think a lot of the comments that he makes in this commentary track remind me of this so well. Oh, this is so great. Really, really great indeed. And then speaking of which, too, he goes on in this commentary track talking about working with Gina Davis, working with Susan Sarandon, working closely with Callie Khouri on the script, and trying to provide a type of tone, and she speaks about Louise's car, etc., and shooting places. There are aspects of the shooting locations that were in terms of economy and cost cutting and budget saving, and he talks too about the importance of telling a story, but also from his advertising roots, he understands the idea of the importance as an artist from his vantage point to convey a message, to convey an idea to the viewers. And if he is not able to do that, then he has failed. But if he is able to do that, then he has succeeded. And this is something that he acknowledges comes from his background as in advertising and design, being necessary to try to convey a message in, say, a single shot or a very limited space of time. Well, that philosophy is what he operates on with his feature film work, including works like Thelma and Louise. So the way in which he's able to economize as well as tell the story, as well as give it that Ridley Scott flourish, in a manner of speaking. Fantastic. And then just working with the other characters, working with the other actors, and how a lot of their performances maybe went, quote-unquote, against type, end quote. So speaking of people like Michael Madsen, people like Harvey Keitel, the character that Harvey Keitel plays maybe was something that wasn't necessarily something that Harvey Keitel played a lot in his career up to then. So it was a really interesting, quote-unquote, change of pace, in a manner of speaking. And then it's also Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt, in many ways, this is a breakout role for Brad Pitt. Very, very memorable performance. And then there's some aspects to working with Adrian Biddle, the director of photography, the multi-camera setup in a lot of ways. There's some examples of scenes in the diner between Thelma and Louise, and they're talking, and there's a multi-camera setup that he speaks about. Talking to about the relationships, how information about the characters is revealed slowly but surely. Talking to about Gina Davis's background and the relationship between Thelma and Daryl, etc. Also, Susan Sarandon, Louise, and aspects of her background that slowly emerge and reveal themselves throughout the course of the film, etc. This is really great stuff. And just a fantastic commentary track from Ridley Scott. So please check out the film with the Ridley Scott commentary track if you haven't already. So that's one option. But that's not all, because then we have another commentary track. This time it's described as being from 2001, and this is with Callie Curry and Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon. And oh my goodness, this is so great. Callie Curry talking about the script, talking about the genesis of the script. I mean, this is its own legend in and of itself. How Callie Curry, essentially, as she describes it, it almost came to her as a type of brilliant source of inspiration. And in that way, that's such a great story. And in another way, it's just an indication of the wonderful, lovely way in which she describes her own writing process. And you can also tell that, on the one hand, there is this great elements of inspiration, but on the other hand, she worked so hard to fashion the story. And she mentions too about maybe it was because it was something that she wasn't doing at the time. She was engaged in a different profession at the time. So, and as she acknowledges herself, so she wasn't really enjoying her current job at the time. So, and she was thinking about this idea, and just happened. It came together over a process of some years, and then when it came together, it was really something, and it brought so many people to the table, including, of course, in terms of the final product, the performances, Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon. And I love this too. And Gina Davis, it's so great to hear her talk about this film in terms of. So she says early on, she says she watched it recently, so she's really into a lot of it's so great to hear her enthusiasm here, and Susan Sarandon speaks about a lot about how this film had such a great impact, and they are known, and Susan Sarandon is known for so many great roles in her career, but one of the roles that she will always be known for, she says, is as Louise in Thelma and Louise. And the same is true for Gina Davis as Thelma. Such a great, so key in terms of the impact of these performances on the on the consciousness, as I mentioned. So. And they have some great moments of the commentary track, in particular, for example, when the scenes with Christopher McDonald come up, and Daryl, and they're just having such a good time. They're laughing. There's a scene involving like early on when he's twirling his keys. Oh, and it's just those details like that. They really love this stuff, and they're reminding us of how the film is structured all the way throughout so brilliantly. I mean, of course, we have Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis at the heart and center of the film, and the construction of their characters as they portray them is as I say, legendary. But they acknowledge as they watch the film that there are so many great performances that make the film as a whole the great film that it is, and that includes Harvey Keitel's performance, that includes Christopher McDonald's performance, etc. And then also they speak too about working with Ridley Scott, Callie Khouri and Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon do. There is this working relationship with Ridley Scott that was so key, and that brought out so much. And also they mentioned too about how he has this keen eye, and Ridley Scott acknowledges as well that he is not from America, right? But he is coming at this film, which is very much about America. So he acknowledges, and Callie Khouri as well say that it's very much America, which is romanticized and idealized on the one hand, but that is so important for the tenor and feel of the film, that Thelma and Louise, that makes it, I think, this grand sweeping landscape of the myth and legend of America, and the myth and legend of Thelma and Louise, and also too the balancing of tones. I mean, Callie Khouri, I think, acknowledges how this film could have been done in a very kind of serious and almost very dark way, and there are actually aspects that are very serious and very, very distressing on the one hand, but there's also this tone of a jubilant, light-hearted feel, almost a comic tone that I think also serves the film so well. So this balancing of tones, I think, came together in the great collaboration. So all these comments and other comments are what make this commentary track so great. So Callie Khouri, Gina Davis, and Susan Sarandon's commentary track from 2001. If you haven't listened to this yet, oh my goodness, you're in for a treat. So please check it out if you can. So you have that commentary track, or the earlier commentary track with Ridley Scott. So you have two commentary tracks made available. Nothing new in terms of a new commentary track for 2022 or 2023, but that's okay. That's okay. I can't complain, and I'm not complaining, because what we had before is great, and so we're getting what we had before, which is great, and we're getting it now, and two of them. So please check out the film with either of these commentary tracks if you haven't already. You're in for a really great time. And then moving on, we can talk about the other supplements. And so when you get to the Blu-ray, we have the two Blu-ray discs, and the first Blu-ray disc, of course, having the film, and the second Blu-ray disc having the supplements. But in fact, the first Blu-ray disc, in addition to the film, you can also get some supplements that are included there. So these are really great. So what can be found on the first Blu-ray disc in terms of the supplements? We have something which is called Ridley Scott Beginnings, and you click on that and it takes you to some options here. The first choice being an interview with Scott Found Us, which is from the year 2022. It's approximately 22 minutes. And this is really great because it's the two of them sitting together, and Ridley Scott talking about his background again, which we heard a little bit about in his commentary track, but again, he emphasizes it, which is really important. His background as an art school designer, his foray into advertising and documentaries, into his feature film career. And then this setting the stage for the trajectory in encountering the Callie Khouri script. And he mentions it here, the work on paper. This is the treasure. This is what he values. And I think that attitude, I think, holds so well. And it shows also to aspects of the working relationship that he had with Callie Khouri, which is also described by Callie Khouri in other aspects of the supplements and the commentary track. So this is great. His inspiration in terms of his work for the BBC, his documentary work, and his short film, Boy and Bicycle. which he made with his brother Tony Scott. He describes it. He made it for £65. And that too is a type of odyssey or journey work, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And he speaks too about working with Adrian Biddle on the film Thelma and Louise. World building is what is mentioned here. The idea of myth. Using images of America and linking that to the myth and world building and the journeys of Thelma and Louise. This is one of the key aspects of watching the film Thelma and Louise, and he acknowledges this very well. So, oh, this is so great. This is a great conversation, again, carrying on a number of the comments that we heard in the commentary track, and then we hear it from Ridley Scott in person. So that's really wonderful here in this one-on-one discussion. So that's the first interview here, which is 22 minutes from 2022. And then there is the next supplement here, in this little section or subsection, is Boy and Bicycle. And this is the 1965 short film. It's approximately 27 minutes that he mentioned he made with Tony Scott. And this is really fascinating stuff in terms of the way in which the control and command over the camera is evident right here in the get-go. And there's this way in which this has a type of interesting interplay between the exteriors of the landscape and environment, as we have this character walking through or riding through, as a manner of speaking, and then also the interior monologues and the way in which the exteriors and the interiors interact with each other. And I think that's very much, I was trying to make the point earlier about, this is very much how one can view the Ridley Scott filmography. The exterior world building on the one hand, and how the interior monologues engage with that, the character-driven aspect and the world building, so the exteriors and the interiors. And it's evident here in Boy and Bicycle, I think, as well as evident in films like Thelma and Louise, for sure. Wow, it's really great. This version, or this copy I have, I don't think it had subtitle options for the Boy and Bicycle short, but just in Innu. Oh, it's so great. And then we have the this is the Plowman, and this is the 30-second Guinness advert from 1977, which is also mentioned in the interview as well. So this is also a very interesting thing too, which is, again, the advertising example, Ridley Scott's career in advertising, and also how he mentioned how you need to convey a message or through a very limited space of time and through limited images. And so how do you convey that effectively? And here's a great example of that. So that's also included as part of the supplement package here. So Ridley Scott Beginnings. That's one aspect of the supplements on disc 1 of the Blu-ray disc 1. And then the other supplement here is with Callie Khouri. And this is described as being from 2023, approximately 20 minutes. And this is Callie Khouri on writing Thelma and Louise. And oh, this is so great. Again, to hear Callie Khouri speak about how she was inspired, how the story Thelma and Louise came to be, and what she describes it here. She describes it so wonderfully and so modestly too, so beautiful. She describes it in one way as divine inspiration. It kind of just came to her, as she says, which is really, it says, there it was. She said, which is really great on the one hand, but at the same time, you can tell through this conversation that she really thought about it. She was just getting into the details and really getting into it, because she said the idea was there, but then she had to really develop the details. Oh, that process! What a genius! Brilliant. She also mentions her own background and how, she mentions too Southern women and her own biography. And the idea too about how you know people but you don't know people. And I think that's such a really keen insight, because this idea of knowing and not knowing, that questioning, even it exists within the world of the characters of Thelma and Louise. Even to some degree, it happens between Thelma and Louise themselves, which is really interesting. You know, but you don't know, but you know. And so that type of a revelation of character, I think, is that she mentions here. That's really something that she was concerned with in terms of her own, say, writing philosophy and development of characters. And so that's great. And that brings us to the way in which, say, backstories are revealed, the backgrounds are revealed, and taking as, I think, a prime example, the backstory of the character of Louise, what we know and what we don't know, and what Thelma knows and what Thelma doesn't know. This also becomes part of the maybe a mystery and the enigma of the character of Louise. And so this is again part of the approach of Callie Khouri as she's developing the characters. Brilliant stuff. And she also mentions too a lot of the story beats and the inspirations and a lot of films that she was interested in. She mentions film noir. She mentions Out of the Past. And she also mentions too the idea of, and also the music palette that was very important for her. Aretha Franklin, B.B. King, etc. This idea of mixtapes, and there are scenes in the film where the characters are singing in the car, and so this is also a very important part of the filmmaking aspect and the telling of the story and the freedom, driving in an open top Thunderbird and just singing to songs on the radio. And this is part of the appeal of this film. You just watch it, you just want to join in on the fun and the freedom, and that's exactly what. And they speak about the ending too. The key part. I mean, they speak about the ending in the commentary tracks and the interviews. I mean, I haven't touched too much upon it about this, but one of the most iconic aspects of the film is how it ends. And so she speaks a little bit about what the development of the ending was, what maybe some of the production pushback might have been about the ending, but ultimately how important the ending, as we see it in the final film, how important that is in terms of the way in which the film, that ending gives the film a type of legendary status. So. And she also mentions here, too, about Ridley Scott's vision of America, which she really catered to as well. She also mentions here about the immediate reaction. She mentions negative critical reviews, that certain backlash as well from certain critical quarters. I think there is a word that was used in one of the articles that's mentioned here, toxic. There's almost a toxic feminism line that's used in, I think, one of the articles. Now, I don't think that's I think, an example of what Callie Khouri mentions here in this interview about how there was a type of backlash about from certain quarters about how this film was viewed as being anti-male, end quote. And so in terms of how some of the male characters were seen to have been portrayed in this story about Thelma and Louise, and how she really took this, and I think she didn't see it in that way, and she sort of disagreed with it, and also she takes this also as a type of comment on sort of the patriarchy in terms of the industry that she views, as well as what she was trying to address in the film itself. And I think those comments, I think, are very well taken, and I find those. You listen to that and you get a sense of what the storytelling intensity of their stories, Thelma and Louise's stories respectively, become, especially when you hear about how certain critics were reacting to this film upon initial release. So this, I think, is a very important conversation to have. And it's also important to consider too about, there's also a lot of positive reaction to the film in terms of awards, and Callie Khouri herself won an Academy Award for her script here. So there were some negative reactions. There were also a lot of positive reactions as well. So that carries the film through in terms of its legendary status. So for these and other points, I think the Callie Khouri interview from 2023 is just so standout. So please check it out if you can. It's so worth it. Again, it's approximately 20 minutes. And then continuing on, we have Blu-ray Disc 2, which is another disc chock full of supplements. And so what do we have on Blu-ray Disc 2? So first up, we have Thelma and Louise: The Last Journey. This is a 2001 documentary, a three-part documentary, totaling overall an hour. So each part being approximately 19 to 20 minutes, respectively. So the first part is on conception and casting. And here we have comments from Ridley Scott and Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon and Callie Curry and Mimi Polk, etc., about the genesis of the work, and Callie Curry's background in music videos, and how and then what she was doing at the same time, which is essentially developing the story that became the great script of Thelma and Louise, and talking here about attitudes regarding what she describes as a female-driven story, and how Callie Curry also mentioned here she wanted initially to direct it, but in terms of telling the story, but then it became part of the conversation in terms of the script and selling the script and production, eventually leading to Ridley Scott. And there's a quote here from Ridley Scott, which is really interesting, is like talking about an antique dealer. You've got to be able to sell your favorite table, which I think is a really one of the great quotes. I think about it, and I think I understand what he means, but at the same time, I have no idea what that means. It's really great. I love that aspect of it. But the collaboration between Ridley Scott and Callie Curry here, and then the casting too. Again, the casting is so key. Some producers didn't quite get the story, but then other producers did. So they're working with Alan Ladd, etc., and that brought also great performers to the table, like Harvey Keitel, and also the breakout performance of Brad Pitt, and of course Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon. And Gina Davis says that there was also a possibility that she could have portrayed Louise as well. But of course she ended up being Thelma, and wow, what a great performance that is. And then that rapport between her and then Susan Sarandon, that's one of the key reasons for the great success for this film. They talk to about how they became friends, and it's great. And then the second part is production and performance, and this is approximately 24 minutes, and just driving the outdoors, the sun, and shooting locations. There's some interiors done in LA, and then also the exteriors primarily in Utah. And Ridley Scott being a great visual stylist director, inspiration taken from other filmmakers like John Ford. I think that's a very important visual reference, the works of John Ford, and also working on the script and the story. And he mentions how there weren't a lot of changes. It was pretty much faithful to the written word of the Callie Curry script. There were some cut scenes, but not many. And also there are some scenes involving Brad Pitt and Gina Davis, very intimate scenes as well. And so they're working together in the frankness and just the direct nature, but also it was this is again a very comfortable working environment that was set there. And then there's some aspects too about ad libs and spontaneous dialogue discussions, etc. And some scenes involving working with the other actors like Timothy Carhart and Marco St. John, the truck driver, very important scene as well. And then part 3 of this documentary is reaction and resonance. And so there's some aspects to discussing the ending of the film, what an alternate ending of the film, which is also discussed elsewhere in the supplements, and then showing it, watching it in film festivals, and then the screenings and the responses, and the responses from the crowd, and there are places where sometimes the crowd would be cheering, and sometimes that would be, on the one hand, very exhilarating from the filmmaker's point of view, but also they'd be cheering at places that would be almost uncomfortable, which is an interesting dynamic. And also some of the critical, quote-unquote, backlash, but also how this film was embraced as well. Don't settle, which is, I think, a great comment here. Don't settle. So this is a 2001 3-part documentary. It's really great. It's totaling approximately an hour, so I'm glad it was carried over for this Criterion release. So please check that out if you haven't already. And then the second supplement here is the original theatrical featurette. This is approximately 5 minutes. And Susan Sarandon, Gina Davis, and Ridley Scott, and it's dealing primarily with a scene involving an explosion. So that's worth checking out if you haven't already. So that's approximately 5 minutes. And then there's a section of extended scenes, totaling overall 33 minutes. So these are scenes of that are existing in the film, but they just a little bit of extensions here and there. And one of them, they're listed here, and for one of the scenes we have the option of a director's commentary, and that's the scene involving, which was mentioned before, the ending. And there's a little bit of an alternate ending that ended up not being the case because we have the ending of the film, but we have the possibility of what could have been. So, and then also the option of listening to the audio commentary track. So in fact, actually it's arranged in a way where you watch it and then you watch it again with the commentary track. So when there's a way in which you play, you can select the kind of chapters, or you can select play all. And when you select the play all option, you watch the ending, and then you watch the alternate ending. You watch the alternate ending again, this time with the commentary track. So that's an interesting. And then you watch the other extensions as well. The other extensions don't have the commentary track, by the way. So at least as far as I understand it. But anyway, so that's one aspect. I don't want to go into too many details about that. Again, I want to save the surprises, especially for those who have not yet seen this great film. Then the next supplement is storyboards, the final chase, and here we have the discussion with Ridley Scott. Again, this is also the discussion from his interview, which is on Blu-ray Disc 1, talking about the importance of storyboards in the context of the ending. And he mentions too about storyboards are so key, and we see some of that. I love, too, some of the storyboard art that's shown. You have the square of the storyboard, and then sometimes you see the character within the square, and sometimes you see them, like their feet are exiting the square, or their heads are kind of popping out of the square. I love those little details. But anyway, the importance of the storyboard and comparing that to the final sequence of the film. And then you get a second sequence, and that little discussion with Ridley Scott is about 5 minutes. And then you get another bit here, which is storyboards with music, and that's approximately 4 minutes. And you see the dynamism of the storyboards with the music overlaid to give you a sense of how vivid the storyboards are and how close they were to what we ultimately ended up getting in terms of the final sequence of the film. So that's interesting, the concept of the storyboards and the final scene. So the interview with Ridley Scott, that's approximately 5 minutes, and then the storyboard example, approximately 4 minutes. And then we have a section which is deleted scenes, again, approximately 14 minutes totaling. I don't want to go into detail here about this, again, for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great film, because I don't want to spoil it, but this is also very great stuff as well. Again, Ridley Scott did mention, and Callie Corey did mention that while there were for the most part, the shooting was faithful to the written script, there were some scenes that were cut. So we see that there's some aspects of the characters, character dynamics, character arcs that were maybe only hinted at in the final film as examples. But here we have some aspects of those deleted scenes. I mean, they're really great. They're really great, and they add a type of further world building or consistency world building. In a manner of speaking. So the deleted scene section here as well, totaling approximately 14 minutes. And then a section for trailer and TV spots. So we have the original theatrical trailer, a wanted TV spot, Call of the Wild TV spot, and TV promo spot. I like the it's really humorous to hear some of the announcer lines. What was one in one of the promo spots? What happens when a girls' night out becomes a girls' night out of control, or something like that? So that kind of is very amusing. So, but part of so you have the trailers and TV spots which round out the supplements, and then of course I forgot to mention another important one, the great music video the 1991 music video, Part of Me, Part of You, which is also part of this as well. So it's great to get the music video aspect here. And we also have some of the shots in the film. So that's rounding out the supplements, which can be found on Blu-ray disc 2. So you get a lot of supplements, and it's really great. Plus the supplements that we found on Blu-ray disc 1, plus the commentary tracks that accompany the film as options. So you get so much stuff here, which is really wonderful indeed. And then let's talk about the packaging and the presentation. Let's look at this here. Look at this. This is the Digipack, and you have the front and the back. And look at this, the thickness and the robust nature of this, which is great, and the font, which I love, and the artwork, which is wonderful. So the artwork here, like I should mention, this is art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustration Sam Hadley, and designer Eric Skillman. So I love this design. I love this. Again, it's a very reminiscent. Also the color palette, the browns and the dusty quality in the outdoors, and the blue of the Thunderbird car. The outdoors and the adventure. And you open it up, and you see that motif here, and it has that almost a western feel, which I love, and the rugged landscape, and look at this. This is so cute. Look at that. Look at that with the car. It's so great. And then you have the inside. I love too the detail of each disc getting its own separate color. So the kind of reddish brown and the light blue, and then the white of the light blue is Blu-ray disc 1, and then this beige white for Blu-ray disc 2, and then this reddish hue for the 4K UHD disc. And I think those are the key color points of the color palette of Thelma Louise, I would argue. So well done for that. Great. And then you have the booklet. So the booklet is great. Again, the design element here, this time focusing a lot on the writing and the screenplay and the Callie Khouri's elements here, which is also expressed in the back pages here, the handwritten aspects. So again, Callie Khouri's writing. This is so, I mean, it can't be emphasized enough just how important Callie Khouri, the written word by Callie Khouri. This is so key. So I love how this element is emphasized here. So great and so lovely. And not only that, we have not one, not two, but 3 essays. So first up, we have Jessica Kiang on Ridley Scott and Callie Khouri's genre bending, which is called How the West Was Won. And then the second is Rachel Syme on the iconic performances by Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon, Bringing to Life. And then the third is Rebecca Traister on the movie's feminist legacy called At the Wheel. So we have not one, not two, but 3 writings, each on similar, yet slightly different, unique aspects that the essayists take. This is really quite wonderful indeed. And then also too, it is again part of the dialogue that was conversation points that were mentioned and brought up by Callie Khouri and others in some of the other supplements. So to have these 3 takes from these three separate essays, I am over the moon. And again, the staple booklet. So that's why you have the staple booklet. You can get as many written essays as possible, and you have 3 great ones here from Jessica Kiang and Rachel Syme and Rebecca Traister. 3 routes through Thelma and Louise, and I love that take. 3 routes through Thelma and Louise. So please check out those essays if you have not yet done so. My strong recommendation, of course, is watch the film first. And then after you've seen the film, please read those 3 essays. I think that's a really great treat. So with that, my dear friends, that concludes the comments that I wanted to make about this great release of a great film, Thelma and Louise. I am so taken with this. I think it's a great addition to the Criterion collection. And I love the emphasis on this work directed by Ridley Scott, written by Callie Khouri. Again, Thelma and Louise. Thelma and Louise is in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog. My goodness, this is great stuff indeed. So, so happy for this, and I hope you get a chance to check it out because it's really worth it. And I hope you enjoy it, my dear friends. This is the work which is Thelma and Louise. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies, including Thelma and Louise. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.